The village had long whispered about the grave that glowed every midnight, but no one dared to approach it. Ethan, a curious young man, had grown up hearing the stories, and for some reason, they had always fascinated him. One cold evening, his intrigue led him to the cemetery at the stroke of midnight. The moon hung high above, casting a pale light over the gravestones, but one grave stood out. There was a soft, golden glow surrounding it, illuminating the darkness. It was as if the grave had its own heartbeat, pulsating with an eerie yet captivating light. The villagers often said it was cursed, that the glow meant something far more tragic than anyone dared to understand. Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward it. He had to know why. As he stood before the glowing grave, a chill ran down his spine. The headstone was old, weathered by time, but the engraving was still legible. "To the love I will never forget." The words seemed to echo in the cold air, adding to the mystery. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this grave than met the eye. His heart raced as he knelt down and carefully brushed away the dirt surrounding the base of the grave. What he discovered next sent a shiver through him, a small wooden box hidden beneath the earth. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a collection of love letters, old photographs, and a locket. Each item seemed to tell a story of a love lost to time, a love that had never found closure. The letters were from a woman named Clara, and the words she had written were filled with such deep emotion that Ethan felt as though he could hear her voice in every line. Clara had fallen in love with a man named Arthur. Their love had been pure, but it had been torn apart by the disapproval of her wealthy family. The letters spoke of promises made, dreams of a future together, and a love that would last forever. Clara wrote about how she had waited for Arthur to return so they could be together, but her family's influence had kept them apart. The letters were filled with longing, but they stopped suddenly, as though Clara's heart had been broken and she could no longer write. The more Ethan read, the more he felt as if he were living Clara's pain. The last letter, which was dated the day before the glow first appeared, contained Clara's deepest thoughts. She had waited for Arthur at their secret meeting place every night, hoping he would come, but he never did. The letter ended with the words, "I will wait for you here forever if I must." As Ethan held the letter in his hands, the glow around the grave seemed to pulse stronger, as if responding to the words. He realized with a start that this was no ordinary grave. This was the grave of a woman who had never stopped loving, whose soul had been bound to the earth by her promise. The light that emanated from the grave was her spirit, trapped in an eternal cycle of waiting. Ethan sat there, staring at the glowing grave, the weight of Clara's love and loss pressing down on him. He felt an overwhelming sense of grief for her, but he also felt a deep connection. It was as if Clara's soul had reached out to him, asking for help. He knew he couldn't leave without finding the truth, but the mystery only deepened as the glow brightened. Ethan could feel her presence more strongly now, and as he stood up, he made a vow to uncover the full story. He had to understand why Clara's soul was trapped here. There was no turning back now. He had to discover the truth behind the grave that glowed at midnight. The next night, Ethan returned to the grave, determined to find answers. This time, he wasn't alone. He had brought Clara's letters with him, hoping they would provide some clue to unlocking the mystery. As he stood at the edge of the grave, the glow was even brighter than before. It felt as if the grave was calling to him, drawing him closer. Ethan sat down and spread the letters out before him, carefully scanning each one. It was clear that Clara's love for Arthur had been all-consuming, but there was something else in the letters, a hidden message he had missed before. Among the pages, there was one letter that seemed out of place. It was dated after Clara's death. Confused, Ethan unfolded the letter, feeling a chill in the air. The handwriting was different, more frantic, as if someone was trying to make sense of a broken heart. The letter spoke of Clara's desperate actions after her last failed meeting with Arthur. It revealed that Clara, in her desperation, had turned to a local witch who was rumored to have powers over life and death. Clara had begged the witch for help, desperate to bring Arthur back to her. The witch had warned Clara that love, when forced by magic, would come at a great cost. But Clara, blinded by her grief, had insisted. The letter described Clara's final moments before her untimely death. A heart broken beyond repair. A woman who had given up everything to love, only to be abandoned. The final line of the letter struck Ethan deeply. It read, "The magic has worked, but it has tied my soul to this earth. I cannot leave until he comes to me. I will wait forever if I must." Ethan sat frozen, a mixture of awe and fear filling his chest. It became clear now. Clara's soul had been bound to the grave because of a promise she had made in her final moments. Her love for Arthur and her refusal to let go had trapped her spirit in this place for eternity. The glowing grave was not just a sign of her undying love, it was a symbol of her soul's torment, bound to the earth, never able to find peace. Ethan knew that if he didn't act soon, Clara's spirit would never be freed. As the night air grew colder, Ethan stood up and looked around the graveyard. There was no sign of anyone else. He felt completely alone with Clara's spirit, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the glow of the grave anymore. There was a presence, something that felt both loving and tragic. Ethan knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. He couldn't undo the magic that had bound Clara's soul, but he couldn't bear the thought of her being trapped forever. His mind raced with ideas, but there was one thing he was certain of. He had to find Arthur. Clara's last wish had been for him to come back, and maybe, just maybe, if Ethan could find him, they could bring an end to the torment. The mystery of Clara's grave and the tragic love story that had unfolded before him seemed to hang in the air, waiting for the final chapter to be written. Ethan knew that finding Arthur was the key to breaking the curse. But where was he? What had happened to the man Clara had loved so deeply? As he walked away from the glowing grave, Ethan felt a deep sadness settle in his heart. The answers he sought were still out of reach, but he knew that his journey wasn't over. He had to uncover the truth. Only then would Clara's restless soul find peace. The following day, Ethan visited the town's library, hoping to find any clues about Arthur's whereabouts. He had barely begun his search when an old woman approached him. Her eyes, clouded with age, studied him as if she had known him for years. "You're looking for Arthur, aren't you?" she asked, her voice raspy, yet strangely soothing. Ethan nodded, taken aback by her sudden appearance. "He's the only one who can end this," she continued. "But be careful, young man. Some things are better left alone." Ethan felt an icy shiver run down his spine. "Who are you?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. The old woman smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. "I was a friend of Clara's, many years ago. I tried to warn her, but love does strange things to people." She looked at him more intently now, as if weighing his soul. "Arthur disappeared after Clara died. No one has seen him since, but if you want to find him, you must understand what truly happened between them." The woman led Ethan to an old, dusty bookshelf in the back of the library. She pulled out a thick, worn book, its pages yellowed with age. "This," she whispered, "is the story of Clara and Arthur." She opened it to the first page, revealing a faded photograph of Clara and Arthur together, standing by the very grave where Ethan had been the night before. They were smiling, young, and in love. But the woman's finger traced a shadow that loomed over the couple in the picture, a shadow that wasn't there when the photo was taken. "The curse started long before Clara turned to magic," the woman explained. "Arthur was a man of secrets, and Clara's love for him made her blind to them. The night of their last meeting, Arthur promised her something he could never give, a future together. But Arthur was already living a lie. He had promised Clara that he would return after a short absence, but in reality he had already left her, choosing a life far away from the one they had built." Ethan felt his heart sink as the old woman continued. Clara's love was so deep, so consuming, that when Arthur didn't return, she could no longer live without him. She sought the witch's help, but it wasn't just magic she used to try and bind his spirit. It was desperation, and that desperation tore her soul apart. The woman paused and looked at Ethan. Arthur's abandonment wasn't the only reason for Clara's tragic end. The curse that followed her death was tied to the guilt he carried. Guilt for abandoning a woman who had given him everything. Ethan felt a wave of sympathy for Clara, but also anger at Arthur for causing her such pain. He had to find him, and soon. But as the woman finished speaking, she added one last warning. "If you find Arthur, be prepared to face the truth that has been hidden for years. Arthur may not be the man you think he is." With that, she walked away, leaving Ethan alone with the book and a sense of urgency in his chest. He had a new mission now, to find Arthur and uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth would come at a much greater cost than he ever expected. As Ethan left the library, the weight of the woman's words hung over him. The search for Arthur had become more complicated than he had imagined. What had happened between him and Clara? What had been hidden for so long? And most importantly, could Ethan find Arthur before it was too late for Clara's spirit to find peace? Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the woman's warning. As he walked through the town, he noticed the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. His mind raced with questions, but the most pressing one was where to begin. Clara's grave glowed in his mind, but Arthur's disappearance was a mystery wrapped in layers of old wounds and unspoken truths. He found himself standing at the town's edge, where the dense woods began. The air felt colder here, and the trees loomed like silent witnesses to the secrets the town held. He knew he had to go to the grave again. The glow from last night was no coincidence, and the woman's words echoed in his ears. The truth is hidden. But what truth? What could be hiding beneath the surface? Ethan entered the graveyard just as twilight descended, the last light of day casting eerie shadows across the tombstones. He walked slowly towards Clara's grave, feeling a strange pull as though the earth itself was calling him closer. The closer he got, the more intense the glow became. It wasn't just light, it was warmth, radiating from the earth itself, like it had been waiting for him. When Ethan reached the grave, his breath caught in his throat. The ground around the grave was soft, as if someone had recently disturbed it. The glowing light seemed to pulse now, almost alive. Ethan knelt down, his hands trembling as he brushed the dirt away. The grave was now partially open, the coffin slightly visible beneath the earth. And then, as if on cue, the glow intensified, and the lid of the coffin creaked open. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he peered into the coffin. There, wrapped in a cloth, lay Clara's body, just as it had been the night of her burial. But something was wrong. The face that once appeared lifeless was now smiling. But it wasn't Clara's smile. It was something else, something darker, a twisted reflection of her sorrow and longing. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine as he stared at the figure in the coffin. He had never seen a corpse that could smile like that. His mind raced. Could it be true? Was Clara's spirit trapped, bound by the curse she had unleashed in her desperation for Arthur? The chill in the air seemed to grow colder as Ethan slowly reached out to touch her hand. The moment his fingers brushed against her skin, the grave trembled, and a voice, soft but distinct, whispered in his ear. "You shouldn't have come, Ethan. The truth will cost you everything." Ethan jumped back, his pulse racing. He spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one. The graveyard was silent, save for the rustling of the trees. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had just crossed the line between the living and the dead. As the voice echoed in his mind, he realized with a growing sense of dread that the grave's glow wasn't just about Clara's spirit. It was a beacon, a call to something much darker, and Ethan was caught in its pull. He had come for the truth, but now he wasn't sure if he would leave with his life. He had no choice but to push forward, but every step felt like a descent into a truth too horrifying to face. He knew the grave wasn't just hiding a tragic past. It was hiding a terrifying secret that could change everything he thought he knew about love, death, and the boundaries between the two. And Arthur? He wasn't just a man to find. He was the key to unraveling a story far darker than Ethan could ever have imagined. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had to find Arthur, but he also knew that discovering the truth could cost him far more than he was willing to lose. Ethan barely slept that night, his mind haunted by the vision of Clara's body and the chilling voice that had whispered in his ear. The next morning, he gathered what little courage he had left and set off in search of Arthur, determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. The town seemed different in the daylight, quieter, as if it too was holding its breath. He spoke to the few townspeople who were willing to talk, but most seemed to know nothing, or if they did, they weren't willing to share. The town's history was a web of secrecy, and with each passing hour, Ethan felt more and more like a stranger in his own home. He couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's grave had been the key to something far darker than he could understand. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the woods again. He had followed every lead, but it seemed all roads led back to the graveyard. He had no choice but to return. But this time he wasn't going alone. He had a feeling that whatever awaited him there was far more dangerous than the grave he had uncovered the previous night. Ethan's heart raced as he approached the familiar path leading to Clara's grave. The glow was back, and this time it was more intense, more alive. The air around him crackled with energy, and he couldn't help but wonder if the earth itself was reacting to his presence. The closer he got, the more his body seemed to resist, as if something was pulling him away from the graveyard. But he pressed on, the need for answers overwhelming his fear. When he reached the grave, he saw that the coffin had been opened fully. There was no sign of Clara's body, but the glow was still there, bright and powerful. Ethan knelt beside the grave, his mind racing. What did it mean? Had Clara's body been taken, or was this part of something far more sinister? Suddenly the ground beneath him began to shift, and a deep, low rumble echoed through the air. Ethan's heart stopped as he realized what was happening. The earth was moving, shifting, as though it had a life of its own. He scrambled to his feet, eyes scanning the graveyard, searching for any sign of danger. But the only movement was the glow, pulsating from the grave like a heartbeat, louder and more powerful with each passing second. And then the ground exploded. A figure emerged from the grave, rising from the dirt like some ancient force returning to claim what was rightfully theirs. Ethan froze, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He had heard the rumors about the graveyard, the whispers about curses and spirits, but he had never imagined anything like this. The figure, cloaked in shadow, stood before him, its form shifting and changing as if it were made of smoke and shadows. Ethan couldn't see its face, but he could feel its eyes on him, piercing through him. The figure spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that sent a chill through Ethan's entire body. You've come for the truth, but you are not prepared for what lies beneath. This grave is not just a marker for a life lost. It is the gateway to something far darker. You will not escape. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The figure reached out, its hand outstretched toward him, and he knew that the truth he had been searching for was not just a story. It was a curse, one that would bind him to the grave forever. In that moment, Ethan understood. He wasn't meant to find the truth. He was never meant to walk away from this graveyard with answers. He was meant to become part of the story, trapped in the very cycle that had haunted this town for generations. The figure's hand closed around his wrist and the glow intensified, blinding him. And then, just as quickly, everything went dark. Ethan awoke to complete silence, the kind that only comes after something truly unimaginable has occurred. His body felt heavy, and his mind was still trying to grasp the nightmare he had just experienced. He was no longer in the graveyard, nor was he in the world he had known. There were no sounds of the town, no whispers of the past, just an eerie stillness. As he tried to move, he noticed the ground beneath him was cold and rough, unlike the soft grass he had last felt beneath his fingertips. His breath quickened and panic surged within him. He was lying in what looked like a burial chamber, walls made of ancient stone. Faint, glowing symbols were etched along the edges of the walls, pulsating with the same eerie glow he had seen at Clara's grave. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots. "Where am I?" he whispered hoarsely. But the only answer was the deafening silence that surrounded him. He tried to stand but stumbled as a wave of dizziness overtook him. The glow from the walls intensified, casting long, terrifying shadows. He could feel something watching him, something far worse than the creature he had encountered earlier. A deep, gnawing dread settled in his chest. He was not alone. In the corner of the chamber a figure stood, Clara. But this was not the Clara he had known. Her skin was pale, her hair was a tangle of shadows, and her eyes, those once warm, kind eyes, were now empty, hollow, as if drained of everything that made her human. Ethan froze, his heart hammering in his chest. "Clara?" His voice barely escaped his lips. She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward him, her lips forming a grin that wasn't hers. It was unnatural, cold. She spoke in a voice that was both hers and something else, something darker. "You should not have come here, Ethan. You cannot undo what has been done. The curse is bound to this place, to me." Her voice echoed in the chamber, reverberating off the walls, making it impossible to understand where her words ended and the darkness began. Ethan felt his knees weaken, his legs refusing to hold him up. The glow around Clara grew brighter, and for a moment he thought the world was going to burn. Suddenly, the ground shook again, and the figure of the shadowed being reappeared. It was now clearer. This time Ethan saw its face. It was ancient, with features twisted in anger and sorrow. Its eyes, black as coal, locked onto Ethan's. "You have broken the pact, and for that, you will never leave. This grave's glow is a curse, a binding that has been passed through generations. Clara is no more. What you see is just the shell that was left behind." The figure moved closer to Ethan, its steps slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. With every movement it made, Ethan could feel the pressure of the curse tightening around him. His body refused to obey, his mind screamed for him to fight, but there was nothing he could do. The figure reached out and touched Ethan's forehead, sending a jolt of energy through his entire being. The world spun, and for a split second he saw everything. The truth about the grave, the curse, Clara, and the town that had tried to bury its secrets for so long. In that brief moment he understood. He understood the tragic truth of the grave and the eternal suffering it held. The glow was not just a symbol, it was the manifestation of the curse, a light that guided lost souls to their doom. Ethan fell to his knees, his body finally succumbing to the curse. His vision blurred, and as the shadows closed in around him, he realized there was no escape. The tragic truth of the grave had claimed him as it had claimed Clara, and now he was part of the story, a story that would continue long after the graveyard had been forgotten.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.